The conservative ideologues in the Supreme Court has decided to uphold a former high school football coach's right to not only pray, but to lead students in prayer at a public institution where government employees, including coaches, are not supposed to endorse religion. Now, this is a ruling that further, of course, chips away at the separation of church and state, because we're talking about, let me repeat again, public institutions that are funded by public taxpayer money. Now, the ruling, of course, was split based on ideological lines. 6 conservative Supreme Court justices wanted to protect is an interesting word here, but wanted to allow this coach who is in a position of power at a publicly funded institution to lead prayer at a public institution. But before we get to what the judges had to say, here's some more context about what led to this case, how this case got to the Supreme Court. Now, the person in question here is Joseph Kennedy. He's a former high school football coach in Bremerton, Washington, and he had a constitutional right to pray on the field after his team's games, the justices ruled. Now, Kennedy started coaching at the school back in 2008 and initially prayed alone on the 50-yard line at the end of games, but then students started joining him, and over time, he actually began to deliver a short inspirational talk with all sorts of religious references. Now, Kennedy did that for years and led students in locker room prayer. So you have all these student athletes in the locker room and he starts praying, right? I want you to consider the power dynamic here. Because if you are an athlete and your coach starts leading the athletes in prayer, well, will there be retaliation if you don't join along? These are the things you should consider when deciding whether or not the Supreme Court made the right decision here. Now, Kennedy stopped leading students in prayer in the locker room and on the field, but wanted to continue praying on the field himself with students free to join him. That's after the school, by the way, asked him to stop. In 2015, they're like, hey, I don't think you can do this, so can you please stop? So he sort of stopped, but again, he stopped in the locker room and on the field, but wanted to continue praying on the field by himself with students free to join if they wished. Concerned about being sued for violating students' religious freedom rights, the school asked him to stop his practice of kneeling and praying while still on duty as a coach after the game. Now, again, whether you're doing it in a locker room or on the field before or after the game, there is a power dynamic at play. And if I were a student athlete who cares about impressing my coach, I would feel a lot of pressure to take part in that prayer sesh, even if I don't want to, even if it makes me uncomfortable, because I don't want the coach to bench me, retaliate against me in some way. And so that is a concern here. Now, here's what Neil Gorsuch wrote in the majority opinion here. The Constitution and the best of our traditions counsel mutual respect and tolerance, not censorship and suppression for religious and non-religious views alike. That is a fascinating take from a Supreme Court justice who helped to overturn our constitutional rights to make decisions about our own bodies, which of course is fueled by a religious argument. But Jessica, these justices don't really care about logic. I would argue they don't even care about what the Constitution really entails. These are ideologues and they're carrying out their desire of a theocracy in this country. I think we're seeing it in the way they're handing down these decisions.
Absolutely, yes. I played college sports. I was a college athlete. We would play schools that were private, Christian colleges. They would have structured, prayer time before the game. We did not have that, but everyone was free to pray. If you want to pray before the game, absolutely you're free to do that. But if the coach were to make structured prayer time ahead of the game, you're absolutely right. That's a power structure. It's not an infringement upon freedom to say the coach can't do that. It would be if they were saying the players cannot pray before the game, but that's not what this ruling was about. And it's really important to point that out because they're trying to make it seem like they're protecting rights when what they are doing is taking them away. Everyone was free to pray before the game, before this ruling and after this ruling. What changed here is now there can be sanctioned prayer time by a teacher or a coach in our schools. This will establish a precedent that will allow public schools to have Christians who are leading them cause all of their students to now, you have to either pray with the teacher or you can sit there uncomfortably. And this is really intentional. The court has a lot of power in deciding what cases they hear. They have like 7,000 plus cases annually that they can pick from, and they choose about 100 to 150. And if you think that that decision is not political, I'm sorry, that's a political decision. When you're making a deliberate choice to take cases that are overturning years-long precedents, and then Clarence Thomas writing in this opinion that they're going to then consider other precedents. Now you're asking people to put cases before the Supreme Court, to start lawsuits for civil rights cases so that they get to appellate courts, so then the Supreme Court can take those cases. This is a political machine. This is not what the court is there for. And by the way, these are not popular either. 2/3 of the country is not in favor of the Roe ruling. And so we're in really, really scary times, and it's important to be very, very clear about what's going on.
Right, and it feeds into a problem that we're already experiencing in this country where Americans have really lost faith and trust in their institutions. So when you see Congress, when you see the courts, including the highest court in the country, the Supreme Court, essentially engaging in ideological activism as opposed to really interpreting constitutional rights accurately and applying it to the law, well, it just further, snowballs into the destruction of like the fabric of this country, right? If people don't trust our institutions, I mean, we've already seen what that manifests into. We've already seen the impact, especially with some of the more, I wish I could say fringe, but it's not so fringe on the right wing. Conspiracy theorists like QAnon and stuff. Part of the reason why QAnon cannot be convinced, even with all of this evidence presented to them, is because the individuals presenting the evidence are typically mainstream corporate media outlets that they no longer trust, right? So there's no trust in the media. Increasingly, our elected lawmakers are completely disconnected from the desires of the very people who elected them into those positions of power in the first place. And then you have judicial activism taking place, and it's so brazen, it's so transparent. And when people don't trust our institutions, again, things really start to devolve quickly. And I think that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, on top of this, I think, defunding public schools has been a huge problem for so long. My civics classes were not great. I know what I know about how the Supreme Court functions because I got Pell Grants and scholarships, and I went to college and studied political science in my undergrad as one of my majors. This was not stuff that I learned in public school. That's a big problem because I think a lot of people are under the impression right now that the Supreme Court actually has no say in what cases they hear, and these cases just come before the court and they're interpreting the law. That's not what happens. They're pretty much handpicking these cases. When I think about the New York case that we heard on Friday, where they overturned this law in New York about concealed carry. This is setting a precedent at a time when there's a lot of energy around gun control, that states cannot regulate concealed carry permits. This is going to prevent states from making gun control laws in a moment when there's a lot of political energy around this. That's extremely political. And you've got to know how the court operates to be able to dissect and figure out what's going on. And if we're defunding public schools, we're not teaching good civics to our citizens, how can you be an informed member of a democracy? How can we have a real democracy if we're not teaching people about the society they live in? I believe as a society, we have a duty to do that, and we're not doing that.
I think you're absolutely right about it. And I think it's intentional. They want the masses to be powerless, ignorant, so they can manipulate and control. And I think we're seeing a lot of that play out today. It's devastating.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.